The morning sun hit the polished marble floors of Kane Industries as Dorian Kane stormed through the lobby. His expensive Italian shoes echoed with each angry step. The employees quickly moved out of his way. They knew that look on his face. It was the same look he had whenever his father tried to control his life. "Mr. Kane, your father is waiting in the conference room," his assistant Martha said, practically running to keep up with his long strides. "Let him wait," Dorian snapped, loosening his tie. At 35, he was tired of being treated like a child who couldn't make his own decisions. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors to find his father, Richard Kane, sitting at the head of the table. Next to him was Victoria Reynolds, the woman they wanted him to marry. She smiled at him, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're late," Richard said, checking his gold watch. "I was busy running our company while you were arranging my life without my permission," Dorian shot back. Victoria adjusted her designer dress, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between father and son. Her red lipstick was perfect. Her blonde hairstyle just so. Everything about her screamed old money and social climbing. "The Reynolds merger is crucial for Kane Industries," Richard explained, for what felt like the 100th time. "And a marriage between you and Victoria would seal the deal perfectly." "I'm not a piece of property you can trade," Dorian said through clenched teeth. Victoria spoke up, her voice sweet as honey, but just as sticky. "Darling, our families have known each other for years. It makes perfect sense." Dorian turned to her. "Don't call me darling, we barely know each other." "That's enough." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "The wedding will happen in 3 months. The announcements go out tomorrow. This isn't up for discussion." Something inside Dorian snapped. He'd spent his whole life trying to please his father while maintaining some small piece of independence. But this was too far. "Watch me discuss it," he said coldly and walked out. He ignored his father calling after him, ignored Victoria's practiced look of disappointment. He needed air. He needed to think. The streets of Manhattan were crowded as always. Dorian walked without direction, his mind racing. They couldn't force him to marry if he was already married. The thought hit him like lightning. It was crazy, reckless, exactly the kind of thing that would drive his father insane. That's when he saw her. She was sitting on a bench at Central Park, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was reading a worn paperback. Despite her shabby appearance, there was something about the way she held herself. Dorian didn't stop to think. He walked right up to her. "I'll give you $1 million to marry me right now." The woman looked up slowly, marking her place in the book. Her eyes were a startling shade of green, intelligent and wary. "Excuse me?" $1 million. Cash. "All you have to do is marry me today. We can divorce in a year and you'll never have to see me again." She studied him for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Completely." A small smile played at her lips. $2 million. Dorian blinked. This wasn't the reaction he expected from someone who appeared to be homeless. "Fine, $2 million. But we do this now." She stood up, tucking the book into her worn bag. "Lead the way." 2 hours later, they stood in front of a justice of the peace. She said her name was Jane Smith. Obviously fake, but Dorian didn't care. The marriage license was real, and that's all that mattered. "You may kiss the bride," the justice of the peace said. Dorian leaned in for a quick peck, but the moment their lips met, something strange happened. A spark of electricity shot through him. Jane pulled back quickly, touching her lips. "Congratulations," the justice of the peace said, but neither of them were listening. Outside the courthouse, Dorian handed her a check. "I'll have my lawyer. Draw up the divorce papers for next year." Jane took the check, studying it. "You really are desperate to avoid something." "That's none of your concern." She smiled that mysterious smile again. "Of course not. Thank you for the interesting afternoon." "Mr. Kane," she turned to leave, but Dorian caught her arm. "Wait, where? Can I find you if I need to contact you?" "Don't worry, I'll find you." She walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Dorian stood there, feeling like he'd just made either the biggest mistake of his life or the best decision ever. Back at Kane Industries, he walked into his father's office without knocking. Richard and Victoria were still there, along with his mother Margaret. "I got married today," Dorian announced. The The silence was deafening. "What did you say?" Margaret whispered. Dorian pulled out his phone and showed them the marriage certificate. "I got married, so I'm afraid the Reynolds merger will have to find another way to happen." Victoria's perfect composure cracked. "You can't be serious. To who?" "My wife," Dorian said simply, enjoying their shock. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." He left them sitting there, feeling lighter than he had in years. Let them try to control him now. What Dorian didn't know was that, at that very moment, his new wife was entering a luxury apartment building on the Upper East Side. She rode the elevator to the penthouse, using a key that someone in her situation shouldn't have. Inside, she kicked off her shabby shoes and went straight to the shower. When she emerged, she was transformed. The messy hair was now sleek and shining, falling in waves down her back. The worn clothes were replaced by designer pieces that fit her perfectly. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "It's done," she said when someone answered. "I'm in." On her dresser sat a framed photo face down. If anyone had turned it over, they would have seen a younger version of the woman standing with a distinguished-looking family. The nameplate on the frame read, "The Montgomery Family, Christmas 2019, Celeste Montgomery, now Jane Smith, now Mrs. Kane, looked at herself in the mirror and smiled. Phase 1 was complete. Now the real work could begin. The next morning, all hell broke loose at the Kane mansion. Richard Kane paced the living room while a team of private investigators presented their findings. "Nothing," the lead investigator said. "Jane Smith doesn't exist. The social security number is fake. It's like she appeared out of thin air." Margaret Kane sat perfectly straight on the antique sofa, her face pale. "This is a disaster. The Reynolds family will never forgive this insult." "Oh, they'll forgive it," Victoria said, scrolling through her phone. "Once we prove this marriage is a fraud and throw that gold digger in jail." Richard stopped pacing. "She's right. Dorian has gone too far this time. I want that woman found and I want her gone." Meanwhile, Dorian sat in his office at Kane Industries, feeling surprisingly calm. His phone had been ringing non-stop since dawn. Reporters, family members, business, associates. Everyone wanted to know about his mysterious bride. Martha knocked on his door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your wife." Dorian's head snapped up. "Send her in." The woman who walked through the door made him do a double take. Gone were the shabby clothes and messy hair. Instead, Jane wore a perfectly tailored white suit that probably cost more than what most people made in a month. Her dark hair fell in elegant waves and her makeup was flawless. "Good morning, husband," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Dorian stared at her. "Who are you really?" "Exactly who you married. A woman who needed $2 million. She crossed her legs, completely at ease. "Though I have to admit, I didn't expect quite this much attention. The press is going crazy. My family is furious. And my private investigators can't find a single real thing about you." She smiled. "Is that why you called them? Don't trust your new wife?" "Trust requires honesty," says the man who married a stranger to spite his family. Before Dorian could respond, his office door burst open. Victoria stormed in, followed by Richard and Margaret. "Here's your little gold digger now," Victoria spat. Jane stood up slowly, turning to face them. For a split second, Margaret's eyes widened with recognition, but she quickly masked it. "Mrs. Kane," Richard said coldly, "I'm prepared to offer you $5 million to disappear. Sign the annulment papers and we'll forget this ever happened." "How generous," Jane said, "but I'm afraid I must." "Decline," Victoria stepped forward. "Listen here, you little—" "No, you listen," Jane cut her off, her voice sharp as steel. "I am legally married to Dorian. Any attempt to force me out will result in a very public, very messy scandal. Is that what you want?" Richard's face turned red. "Are you threatening us?" "Not at all, I'm simply stating facts." Jane picked up her designer purse. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lunch appointment." She walked out, leaving them all staring after her. "She's not what she seems," Margaret said quietly. Dorian looked at his mother. "What do you mean?" But Margaret just shook her head and left the room. That afternoon, Celeste sat in her penthouse, reviewing the morning's events. Everything was going according to plan, almost. She hadn't expected Margaret Kane to recognize her. It had been 7 years after all, and she'd changed so much. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown. "Hello, sister dear," a male voice said when she answered. Celeste's blood ran cold. "James, did you really think you could come back to New York without me finding out?" Her brother's voice was smooth as poison, making quite a splash too, a Kane of all people. "What do you want?" "The same thing I wanted 7 years ago, what's rightfully mine, the documents you stole." Celeste gripped the phone tighter. "Those documents prove you murdered father." "They prove nothing, but soon, dear sister, you'll give them to me. Or should I tell your new husband who he really married, the long-lost Montgomery heiress back from the dead?" "You don't scare me anymore, James," he laughed. "We'll see about that. Welcome home, Celeste." The line went dead. Celeste walked to her safe and opened it. Inside was a USB drive that contained enough evidence to destroy her brother and half the corporate empires in New York. 7 years ago, she'd discovered James's plot to take over Montgomery Industries through murder and fraud. He'd killed their father, making it look like suicide, but he hadn't counted on Celeste finding proof. She'd run, faking her own death, waiting for the right moment to return and expose him. Now, married to Dorian Kane, she was perfectly positioned to bring down both her brother and the corrupt empire he'd built. What she hadn't counted on was the way her heart raced when Dorian was near, the way his touch had sent electricity through her body, the way he looked at her with those intense eyes, trying to figure out her secrets. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dorian. "Dinner tonight. We need to talk." Celeste stared at the message. She'd planned everything so carefully. Get close to the Kanes, use their resources to expose James, take back what was rightfully hers. But now, looking at Dorian's message, she felt something she hadn't expected. Guilt. Because the biggest secret wasn't who she really was. The biggest secret was that she was starting to fall for the man she was supposed to destroy. In his office, Dorian couldn't focus on work. He kept thinking about Jane, the way she handled his family, her perfect poise, the flash of steel in her eyes. She wasn't some random woman off the street. She was someone who knew how to move in their world. His computer pinged with an alert. Someone had tried to access old files about Montgomery Industries, files that had been sealed since the tragic murder-suicide that had wiped out most of the family 7 years ago. The login attempt had come from his wife's computer. Dorian leaned back in his chair, pieces starting to fall into place. He pulled up an old newspaper article about the Montgomery tragedy. There was a photo of the family, father, mother, son, and daughter. The daughter, dark hair, green eyes, a face he'd seen just hours ago, older but unmistakable. "Well, well," he murmured, "who did I really marry?" The restaurant was one of those exclusive places where the rich made their deals and spread their secrets. Dorian sat across from his new wife, watching her examine the wine list with practiced ease. "You know," he said casually, "it's interesting how someone who was begging on the streets yesterday knows so much about French wines." Celeste lowered the menu. "I never said I was begging. You just assumed that." "Like I'm assuming you're Celeste Montgomery?" The wine glass in her hand trembled slightly before she set it down. But her voice remained steady. "What makes you think that? You tried to access Montgomery Industries files from your computer. Sloppy mistake for someone so careful." A long moment passed between them. Finally, she said, "The Celeste Montgomery you're thinking of died 7 years ago." "Did she? Or did she run away after her father's suspicious suicide?" Dorian leaned forward. "The question is, why come back now? And why marry me?" Before she could answer, they were interrupted by the arrival of an unwelcome guest. James Montgomery stood at their table looking exactly like his photos from the society pages, handsome, polished, and completely ruthless. "Sister dear," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "aren't you going to introduce me to your new husband?" The color drained from Celeste's face. Around them, people started whispering and pulling out phones. The news would be everywhere. "Within minutes, James," she said, her voice tight. "Leave now." "But I'm family," he smiled, pulling up a chair. "And family should stick together. Isn't that right, Dorian? Though I must say you've married into quite the complicated one." Dorian looked between them, seeing the same green eyes, the same sharp features. There was no doubt they were siblings. But while Celeste's eyes held fear and determination, James's were cold and empty. "Mr. Montgomery," Dorian said carefully, "this is a private dinner. Nothing's private anymore, not since my dear sister decided to come back from the dead and marry you." James turned to Celeste. "Have you told him why you disappeared? About the files you stole?" "I stole nothing," Celeste said. "I took evidence." "Evidence of what?" Dorian asked. But James was already standing. "I'm sure my sister will tell you all about it. That is, if she lives long enough. These New York streets can be so dangerous." He walked away, leaving behind a heavy silence. "We need to leave," Celeste said, grabbing her purse. "Now." They barely made it to Dorian's car before reporters started swarming the restaurant. He drove quickly through the city streets, while Celeste kept checking the mirrors. "Talk," he demanded. "My father didn't commit suicide," she said, her voice shaking. "James killed him. I found proof, documents, recordings, emails. He was embezzling money, making deals with criminals. When our father found out James murdered him, "Why didn't you go to the police?" I tried, but James had people everywhere. He tried to kill me too, said it would look like a tragic accident. The grieving daughter, unable to cope with her father's death." She laughed bitterly. "So I ran, changed my identity, waited. For what? For a chance to expose him. The evidence is still hidden, but I needed resources, protection." She looked at him. "The Canes have both." "So you used me," Dorian said flatly. "Yes," she admitted, "but I didn't expect..." "Didn't expect what?" Before she could answer, a black SUV slammed into them from behind. Dorian fought to control the car as another SUV appeared beside them. "James," Celeste whispered, "he's trying to force us off the road." Dorian swerved through traffic, trying to lose their pursuers, but the SUVs stayed with them, getting closer and closer. "Hold on," he warned, making a sharp turn down a narrow street. The sound of screeching tires and crashing metal filled the air. In the rearview mirror, Dorian saw one of the SUVs slam into a parked car, but the other one was still coming. They raced through the city, running red lights, taking sharp turns. Celeste gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white. "The penthouse," she said suddenly. "We need to get to my penthouse. The evidence is there." A bullet shattered their back window. Celeste screamed as glass flew everywhere. "We're not going to make it," Dorian said through gritted teeth. "Yes, we will." She pulled out her phone. "Because I'm about to do something very stupid." She dialed a number. "Margaret, it's Celeste Montgomery. Remember me now? I need help. Your son's life depends on it." Dorian looked at her in shock. "My mother." "She was friends with my mother," Celeste explained quickly. "She recognized me this morning, and she knows what James did." 5 minutes later, police sirens filled the air. The SUV behind them suddenly broke off, disappearing into a side street. They made it to Celeste's building, racing up to her penthouse. Inside, she ran straight to a hidden safe. "Here," she said, pulling out a USB drive. "Everything's on this, all the proof of what James did." Dorian took the drive, staring at it. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? Would you have believed me? The crazy woman claiming to be a dead heiress? I believed in you enough to marry you. You married me to spite your family." "Maybe." He stepped closer to her. "Or maybe there was something about you I couldn't resist, even when you were pretending to be someone else." Their eyes met. The air between them crackled with tension. Then Dorian's phone rang. It was his mother. "The police are on their way," Margaret said. "And Dorian? I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Celeste sooner. I've been trying to gather evidence against James for years. When I saw her this morning..." "It's okay, Mom," Dorian said. "We have the evidence now. Be careful. James won't stop." As if on cue, the power in the penthouse went out. Celeste grabbed Dorian's arm. "He's here." In the darkness, they heard the elevator doors open. In the darkness of the penthouse, Celeste grabbed Dorian's hand and pulled him toward her bedroom. They could hear footsteps in the living room. "There's a fire escape through here," she whispered. "You're not going anywhere, sister dear." James's voice came from behind them. When they turned, he was standing in the doorway, holding a gun. 2 men in black suits flanked him. "It's over, James," Celeste said. "We have proof of everything you did. James laughed. You mean this? He held up a USB drive identical to the one Dorian had. Amazing what good hackers can do. They've been tracking your every move since you came back to New York. Dorian felt Celeste's hand tighten on his arm. That's a copy, she said. Is it? James smiled. Are you sure you grabbed the right drive from your safe? Want to bet your lives on it? Celeste's sharp intake of breath told Dorian everything. James had the real drive. Now, James said, here's what's going to happen. You're both going to have a tragic accident. They happen all the time to newlyweds. Too much champagne, a balcony railing that gives way. You won't get away with this, Dorian said. I already have, for 7 years. James stepped closer. Did my sister tell you how our father died, Dorian? How he begged for his life? How? I made it look like suicide. You're sick, Celeste spat. I'm practical, just like father taught us to be. James nodded to his men. Take care of them. The men moved forward, but suddenly the penthouse was flooded with light. Not from the power coming back on, but from dozens of police spotlights outside the windows. NYPD, drop your weapons. The voice came from a megaphone. James spun around, his face twisted with rage. This is impossible. Not impossible, Margaret Kane said, stepping out from the shadows of the hallway. She held up her phone. Just good planning. I've been recording everything. You just said, James. About killing your father, about planning to kill my son and your sister. Police burst through the front door. James raised his gun, but Dorian tackled him before he could fire. The gun went skidding across the floor. You ruined everything, James snarled as the police handcuffed him. Celeste walked up to her brother. No, James, you did that yourself. After the police led James and his men away, Margaret hugged Celeste tightly. I should have helped you 7 years ago, she said. When you came to me with your suspicions about James, you did help me, Celeste said. You gave me money to run, kept my secret, and now you've helped me end it. Dorian watched them, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. That's why you chose me to marry. You knew my mother would recognize you. I chose you because I needed someone strong enough to stand up to James, Celeste admitted. Someone who wouldn't bend to pressure or threats. Your reputation for defying your father's control, it made you perfect. And now? Dorian asked. Now that your plan worked. Celeste looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. Now? I don't know. I never planned for what? For falling in love with you. Margaret quietly slipped away, leaving them alone. I understand if you want an annulment. Reynolds sat across from him, a thin smile on her perfect lips. I think we can help each other, she said. I want Dorian, you want revenge. I'm listening. Your sister's evidence. There's more to it than just your father's murder, isn't there? Something that could destroy both our families. James leaned forward. The question is, are you willing to burn it all down to get what you want? Victoria's smile widened. Absolutely. That evening, Dorian found Celeste in her penthouse, surrounded by old family photos. I found these in a storage unit, she explained. Look how happy we were. Dorian sat beside her, looking at a picture of young Celeste with her parents. Tell me about them. Mom was the kindest person I've ever known. She loved art and music. Dad was strict but fair. He taught us that power comes with responsibility. She touched the photo gently. James never understood that. And now you run both our family's companies. Celeste looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Father's stepping down. Too many questionable deals coming to light. The board asked me to take over. Dorian, I'm sorry. I know what it's like to lose faith in your family. He took her hand. I haven't lost everything. I found you. Their moment was interrupted by Celeste's phone ringing. It was Patricia Chen. Someone broke into the Montgomery Industries servers, Patricia said frantically. They're downloading everything. Celeste? Put the phone on speaker. What files? All of them. Including... Patricia lowered her voice. Project Phoenix. Celeste gripped Dorian's hand tightly. Stop them, now. Too late. It's done. After hanging up, Celeste ran to her laptop. Dorian had never seen her so scared. What's Project Phoenix? Something my father discovered before he died. A conspiracy involving nearly every major company in New York. including both our families." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "If this gets out, it won't just destroy James, it'll destroy everyone. Then we'll face it together." "You don't understand," she whispered. "Your father wasn't just making questionable deals. He was part of it. And if James exposes this, he'll take down both our families." Celeste nodded. "I never wanted this. I only wanted justice for my father." Dorian pulled her close. "We'll figure it out. I promise." But as they held each other, both knew their problems were just beginning. Because somewhere in New York, Victoria Reynolds was reading through the stolen files, a triumphant smile on her face. And in his prison cell, James Montgomery looked out at the city lights, knowing his revenge was finally within reach. Victoria Reynolds sat in her luxury apartment, scrolling through the stolen files from Project Phoenix. Each page revealed more shocking secrets. Money laundering, political bribes, even murder. The wealthy families of New York had been busy. Her phone rang. "James Montgomery." "Did you find what we need?" he asked. "More than that," Victoria smiled. "I found something about your sisters. A new mother-in-law. Margaret Kane isn't as innocent as she pretends. Tell me, she helped Celeste fake her death 7 years ago. But that's not all. She was in love with your father. There are letters, emails, quite scandalous." James laughed. "Perfect, release it to the press." "Not yet," Victoria said. "First, we need to deal with Richard Kane. These files show he helped cover up your father's murder." "Why would he do that?" "Because your father discovered Richard was stealing from his own company. They made a deal. Richard would help hide the murder, and your father would keep quiet about the theft. And now they're all going to pay," James said. At the Kane mansion, Margaret sat alone in her study, looking at old photographs. One showed her with Robert Montgomery, Celeste's father. They were young, smiling, standing too close to be just friends. Dorian found her there. "Were you ever going to tell me the truth?" he asked. Margaret didn't look up. "About what?" "About you and Robert Montgomery. About helping Celeste fake her death. About father's involvement in his murder." Now she did look up, her eyes filled with tears. "How did you find out?" "It doesn't matter. Just tell me why." Margaret stood up slowly. "I loved Robert. We were engaged before I met your father, but our families had other plans. I married Richard, Robert married Helen. We tried to stay away from each other, but you couldn't." "No. When he discovered what Richard was doing, he came to me. We were going to run away together." She wiped her eyes. "Then James killed him. And you helped Celeste escape. She was all I had left of Robert. I couldn't let James kill her too." Before Dorian could respond, his phone buzzed. Breaking news alerts flooded the screen. The story was everywhere. Margaret Kane's affair with Robert Montgomery, Richard Kane's theft, James Montgomery's revenge. "They released everything," he whispered. Across town, Celeste watched the news in horror. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, old friends suddenly remembering she existed. She called Dorian. "Turn on the news." "I've seen it." You okay?" "No, James won. He destroyed everything." "Not everything, not us." A knock at her door made Celeste freeze. Through the peephole, she saw Victoria Reynolds. "She's here," Celeste whispered into the phone. "Don't let her in. I'm on my way." But Victoria wasn't alone. 2 men in suits stood with her, and one was holding a gun. "Open up, Celeste," Victoria called. "We need to talk about your mother." Celeste's breath caught. "What about my mother?" "Open the door and I'll tell you, or my friends here will open it for me." With shaking hands, Celeste opened the door. Victoria swept in, perfect as always, in her designer clothes. "Your mother didn't die of grief," Victoria said. "She was murdered, and I can prove who did it." "You're lying." "Am I?" Victoria pulled out her phone and played a video. It showed Helen Montgomery in her garden, arguing with someone. The camera angle changed, showing the other person clearly. Celeste stumbled back. "No, it's not possible." "Because the person arguing with her mother, just hours before her death, was Margaret Kane. Your father's lover killed your mother," Victoria said, "and your new husband's father helped cover it up. Still think you married into the right family?" In his car racing through the city streets, Dorian tried calling his mother. No answer. His father called instead. They're saying I helped cover up Robert Montgomery's murder, Richard said. Did you? A long pause. Son, everything I did was to protect our family. That's not an answer. No, it's not, Richard sighed. But if you want the real answer, ask your mother about Helen Montgomery's death. Dorian's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Ask her why she went to see Helen that day. Ask her what they fought about. Ask her about the poison in Helen's evening tea. The call ended, leaving Dorian in shocked silence. Back at the penthouse, Celeste faced Victoria with steel in her eyes. What do you want? Simple, call a press conference. Announce you're giving control of Montgomery Industries to James. Say it was all a mistake, that he's innocent. In return, this video never sees the light of day. And if I refuse? Victoria smiled. Then everyone learns that their beloved Margaret Kane is a murderer. Your marriage to Dorian falls apart. And maybe, just maybe, you have a tragic accident like your parents. You really think you can threaten me? I think I already have. Victoria headed for the door. You have 1 hour to decide. Choose wisely. After she left, Celeste sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. The woman who had helped her, protected her, was the same woman who had murdered her mother. Her phone rang again. Dorian. Don't trust anyone, she whispered when she answered. Not even your mother. I know, he said. I'm almost there. We'll figure this out together. But as Celeste looked at the city lights through her window, she wondered if some things were too broken to fix. In his prison cell, James smiled as he watched the news coverage of his family's scandal. Soon he would be free. Soon everyone who had wronged him would pay. And in her garden, Margaret Kane held an old love letter from Robert Montgomery and wept for all the lives her love had destroyed. Dorian found Celeste sitting in her dark penthouse, the city lights casting shadows across her face. She didn't look up when he entered. Did you know, she asked. About my mother? No. He sat beside her. She just confessed everything. Tell me. She loved your father since they were young. When your mother found out about their affair, she threatened to expose everything. Not just the affair, but all the illegal dealings between our families. So Margaret killed her. She claims it was an accident. They argued your mother had a heart condition. Stop. Celeste stood up. I don't want to hear excuses. Dorian's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Time's running out. 1 hour left. She wants me to give everything back to James, Celeste said, to say he's innocent. You can't do that, can't I? Your mother killed mine, Dorian. Your father helped cover up my father's murder. Maybe James was right all along. Maybe we're all just monsters pretending to be good people. Dorian grabbed her shoulders. Listen to me. We're not our parents. We can end this cycle of secrets and revenge. How? By telling the truth, all of it. Celeste stared at him. We'll lose everything. Maybe that's what we need. Before she could respond, the power went out. Emergency lights cast an eerie glow through the penthouse. Not again, Celeste whispered. But this time, it wasn't James's men who stepped out of the shadows. It was Richard Kane. Father? Dorian moved in front of Celeste. What are you doing here? Richard held up a gun. Cleaning up my family's mess. One last time. By killing us? By killing her. Richard pointed the gun at Celeste. The source of all our problems. I won't let you. You don't have a choice. Victoria's already released the video of Margaret and Helen. Our reputation is ruined. The only way to save anything is to make it look like Celeste killed herself out of guilt. Like mother. Like daughter. Celeste laughed bitterly. You really think that will fix anything? It will give us a chance to rebuild. Without you, without the Montgomery name dragging us down. Dad, Dorian said softly. Put the gun down. I'm trying to protect you, son. No, you're trying to protect yourself, just like always. A noise from the hallway made Richard turn. Margaret stood there, her face pale. Richard, stop this. You did this, he snarled. You and your love for Robert Montgomery destroyed everything. No, our greed destroyed everything. Our lies, our crimes. Margaret stepped closer. I'm turning myself in for Helen's death, for helping cover up Robert's murder, all of it. You can't. I already have. The police are on their way. As if on cue, sirens filled the air. Richard's hand shook. "It's over," Margaret said. "Put the gun down." For a moment, no one moved. Then Richard slowly lowered the gun. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I just wanted—" "We all wanted something," Celeste said. "Power, money, love, revenge. Look where it got us." Police burst through the door, weapons drawn. As they led Richard away, Margaret turned to Celeste. "I loved your father," she said, "but that doesn't excuse what I did to your mother." "I'm so sorry." Celeste watched her follow the police out. Dorian took her hand. "What now?" "Now we tell the truth. About everything." They called a press conference for the next morning. But as they prepared to face the world, Victoria Reynolds was making one last desperate move. She visited James in prison. "They're going to confess everything," she said. "We'll all go down." James smiled. "Not everything. They don't know about Dubai." Victoria's eyes widened. "You can't expose that. The consequences—" "Watch me." As dawn broke over New York, Celeste and Dorian stood before a room full of reporters. Camera lights flashed as Celeste stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Celeste Montgomery," she began, "and it's time you knew the truth about our families." But before she could continue, an aide rushed in and handed her a phone. Her face went white as she read the message. "What is it?" Dorian asked. "James," she whispered. "He's escaped." Chaos erupted at the press conference. Security guards rushed. Celeste and Dorian out as reporters shouted questions. Police sirens wailed in the distance. "How did he escape?" Dorian demanded as they rode down in the elevator. "2 guards were paid off," the police chief explained over the phone. "He had outside help." Victoria, Celeste, said. "She visited him yesterday." They reached the parking garage. Dorian's security team surrounded them, but Celeste knew her brother. He was always one step ahead. Her phone rang. "Unknown number." "Hello, sister," James said. "Missing me? Where are you?" "Where everything started, where father died." "You have 1 hour to come alone or I release the Dubai files." The line went dead. "What's in Dubai?" Dorian asked. Celeste's hands shook. 7 years ago, our families were involved in something terrible. A deal gone wrong. People died. If that information gets out, then we'll deal with it together. "No." Celeste stepped away from him. "I have to end this, alone." "Like hell you do." But Celeste wasn't listening. She grabbed the keys from his pocket and ran to his car. By the time Dorian reached her, she was already driving away. The Montgomery mansion stood empty and dark. Celeste parked in front and stared up at the house where she grew up, where her father died, where everything fell apart. James waited in their father's study. He looked different in prison clothes, less polished, more dangerous. "You actually came alone," he said, still so predictable. "What do you want, James?" "Want? I want what's mine. The company, the money, the power." He poured himself a drink. "But mostly I want you to suffer like I have. You killed our parents." "No, sister dear, we killed them, all of us. Mother died because of the affair. Father died because he was weak. And now," he pulled out a gun, "now you die because you couldn't let the past stay buried. You're insane." "Am I? Dubai wasn't my idea, you know. It was father's. His last great plan to unite our families. Too bad it ended with all those workers dead." Celeste felt sick. He wouldn't. He did. And the Canes helped cover it up. That construction site collapse? Not an accident. They needed to hide the evidence. Evidence of what? Human trafficking, slave labor, murder. James smiled. "Still think father was a good man?" "Drop the gun, James." Dorian stood in the doorway, his own weapon aimed at James. "I told you to come." "So alone," James said to Celeste. "She did," Dorian replied. "I just know my wife well enough to guess where she'd go." James laughed. "How touching. The loving husband saves the day." He fired. The bullet hit Dorian in the shoulder, spinning him around. Celeste screamed, but Dorian didn't fall. He fired back, hitting James in the leg. The study erupted in chaos. James and Dorian struggled for the guns. Celeste grabbed a heavy crystal decanter and brought it down on her brother's head. James crumpled to the floor. "Are you okay?" she asked Dorian. "Just a graze." He pulled her close. "You should have waited for me. I couldn't risk losing you too." police sirens approached. But before they arrived, James spoke one last time. "Check father's safe," he mumbled. "Behind the painting. The truth about everything." Celeste moved the painting, revealing the wall safe. The combination was her birthday. Some things never changed. Inside was a single USB drive and a letter. "My dearest children," she read, aloud. "If you're reading this, I'm dead. Probably by James's hand. But the truth is, I deserved it. The things I've done, the lives I've destroyed. Dubai was the final straw. I tried to stop it, to expose it, but the Kanes threatened you. Celeste. So I made a deal, my silence for your safety. James found out. He couldn't accept my weakness. Maybe he was right. The evidence of everything is on this drive. Use it wisely. And Celeste, forgive me, all my love, Father." Police flooded the room, arresting James. Paramedics treated Dorian's wound. "What do we do now?" he asked. Celeste looked at the drive in her hand. The truth about Dubai, about both their families, about everything. "Now," she said, "we finish what my father started. We make it right." But as they left the mansion, Victoria Reynolds watched from her car across the street. She held up her phone, showing a video of the entire confrontation. "Oh, darling," she whispered, "this isn't over. Not by a long shot." The contents of Robert Montgomery's USB drive shocked the world. Headlines screamed about the Dubai scandal, about hundreds of missing workers, about money laundering and murder. Both the Kane and Montgomery empires crumbled. Overnight, Celeste sat in her office at Montgomery Industries, watching the stock prices fall. Beside her, Dorian reviewed the latest resignation letters from board members. "That's 15 so far," he said. "More will follow. Let them run." Celeste turned away from the screens. "We'll rebuild, the right way this time." Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check the news." On TV, Victoria Reynolds stood before a crowd of reporters. She looked perfectly composed, not a hair out of place. "What I'm about to show you will change everything," she said, holding up her phone. "The truth about what happened at the Montgomery mansion last night." The video played. It showed James's confession about Dubai, but cleverly edited. It made it seem like Celeste and Dorian had known about the trafficking all along, had helped cover it up. "They're as guilty as their parents," Victoria declared. "And I have proof." Dorian grabbed his phone. "I'll call our lawyers." "Wait." Celeste smiled. "Look." On screen, Patricia Chen had stepped up to the microphone. "I have something to say about Ms. Reynolds." She held up her own phone. A recording played, Victoria's voice clear and damning. "Of course I knew about Dubai," she was saying. "I helped arrange it. Those workers, I made sure they disappeared, and now I'll blame it all on the Montgomerys and Kanes. James will take. The fall. Celeste and Dorian will lose everything, and I'll take control of both companies." Victoria's face went white. She tried to run, but police were already moving in. "Patricia," Celeste whispered. "She was recording everything." "Your father's oldest friend," Dorian said. "She was protecting you all along." As they watched Victoria being led away in handcuffs, Margaret Kane appeared in their office doorway. "I'm leaving for prison tomorrow," she said quietly. "I wanted to say goodbye." Celeste stood. "Did you know about Dubai?" "No, Robert tried to tell me, but I was too focused on our affair, on my own selfish needs." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Celeste, for everything." "I know." They hugged, years of pain and secrets between them. "Take care of each other," Margaret said, looking at them both. "Break the cycle, be better than we were." After she left, Dorian took Celeste's hand. "She's right. We can be better." "Can we? Look at our families, our history. Look at us. You could have chosen revenge. I could have chosen money and power. Instead, we chose truth. We chose love." Celeste touched his face gently. "When did you get so wise?" "When I married a woman who taught me that real strength comes from doing what's right, not what's easy." Their moment was interrupted by Celeste's phone. The Dubai authorities. They had found survivors of the construction site collapse, workers who could testify about what really happened. "They're willing to talk," Celeste said, "to help us expose everything." "Then let's help them." Dorian squeezed her hand. together. Outside their office, New York City continued to buzz with scandal and speculation. James sat in his prison cell, plotting his next move. Victoria faced reporters and cameras, her perfect mask finally cracking. But in that quiet office high above, the city, Celeste and Dorian held on to each other, choosing love over power, truth over lies. They had lost their fortunes, their family names were tarnished, but they had found something more valuable. A chance to start over, to be better, to break free from the sins of their parents. "I love you," Celeste whispered. "Not because of our families or our companies, just because you're you." "And I love you," Dorian replied, "the real you, the strong, brave woman who chose justice over revenge." As the sun set over Manhattan, casting golden light through their office windows, they knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be trials, accusations, more secrets to uncover. But they would face it all together. No more lies between them, no more masks to hide behind. Because sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it's about choosing each other every day, about fighting for what's right even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. And sometimes in the midst of losing it all, you find exactly what you need. 1 year later, the courtroom was packed as James Montgomery received his sentence. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. He stared at Celeste with cold eyes as they led him away. Victoria Reynolds got 20 years for her role in the Dubai scandal. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide her tears as they took her away in handcuffs. Richard Kane made a deal with prosecutors. 10 years in exchange for exposing other corrupt business leaders. He didn't look at his son as they led him out. Margaret Kane accepted her sentence with dignity. 5 years for Helen Montgomery's death. Before they took her away, she hugged Celeste one last time. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become," she whispered. Now standing in the rebuilt offices of Montgomery Kane Industries, Celeste watched the sun rise over Manhattan. So much had changed in a year. They'd used the money from selling both families' mansions to compensate the Dubai victims and their families. The survivors' testimonies had exposed corruption throughout the industry, leading to new laws protecting workers worldwide. "Ready for the board meeting?" Dorian asked, walking in with coffee. "Almost." Celeste straightened her simple blazer. No more designer clothes or fancy jewelry. They'd learned to live simply, to value what really mattered. The new boardroom was smaller than the old one. Around the table sat people they trusted. Patricia Chen, young executives with fresh ideas, representatives from worker rights organizations. "The quarterly numbers are in," Patricia announced. "Profits are lower than the old days, but honest profits," Celeste finished. "That's what matters." They'd rebuilt both companies from the ground up, merging them into something new, something better. Every contract was transparent, every worker protected, every deal ethical. After the meeting, Dorian found Celeste in their small office. She was looking at an old photo of both families at a charity gala, all smiles hiding dark secrets. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The money? The power?" "No." She put the photo away. "I have everything I need right here." Her phone buzzed. A text from the Dubai team. Another family reunited with a worker they thought was dead. Another wrong made right. "We got a letter from James," Dorian said quietly. "What does he want?" "Forgiveness. He says prison has changed him." Celeste thought about her brother, about forgiveness, about change. Maybe someday. Not today. They walked to the window together. Below, the city was waking up. Not their city. Anymore not their empire, but something more precious, their home. "I have news," Celeste said softly. "Good news or bad news?" She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "The best news." Dorian's eyes widened. "You mean?" "Yes. We're going to have a baby." He pulled her close, both of them crying happy tears. "A fresh start," he whispered. "A new generation without all the lies and pain." "A better legacy," she agreed. That evening they visited the small cemetery where both their families were buried. Celeste placed flowers on her parents' graves. "I hope you're proud," she said. "Not of what we lost, but of what we've built. Something real, something good." Dorian took her hand. "They would be proud. You turned tragedy into hope, hate into love. As they walked away, Celeste thought about the journey that had brought them here. A fake marriage that became real. A quest for revenge. That turned into redemption. A love story born from lies that grew into the deepest truth she'd ever known. In her office, Victoria Reynolds read about their success from her prison cell, burning with anger. In his maximum security cell, James looked at an old family photo and for the first time felt regret. In her minimum security prison, Margaret Kane smiled as she read Celeste's letter about the baby. Some things were more powerful than revenge, and in their modest apartment, Celeste and Dorian held each other, watching the sunset. No more mansions, no more billions, no more family empires, just love, just truth, just the future they would build together. "I wouldn't change a thing," Celeste said. "Every lie, every pain, every loss led me to you." "To us," Dorian corrected. "To this." She touched her stomach, feeling their baby move. A new Montgomery Kane born not from privilege and power, but from love and redemption. The city lights came on one by one, stars in their own private sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to prove that people can change, that love can heal, that truth can set you free. But tonight, in this moment, they had everything they ever really needed. Each other, their love, their truth, and sometimes that's the greatest fortune of all, the end.